Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Tin Man Score Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'll be reacting to another Midnight Terrace video for you guys. And this one's called Four Creepy True Winter Horror Stories. I figured since we're still in a winter month, I might as well go ahead and react to this one. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the lights off, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road and in the bag. Okie dokie, here we go.
This happened 4 winters ago.
Okay.
It was an unusually mild night for January. No snow, barely a chill in the air. I decided to head out for a walk around 8 p.m. My schedule was all over the place because of shift work, and nighttime walks had become my way of unwinding. For context, I'm a fairly tall guy, pretty athletic, and I was in my late 20s at the time. Walking at night wasn't something that ever bothered me. I felt safe enough in my own neighborhood. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. I passed by a row of old houses, a diner that always smelled of grease, a corner store with flickering neon signs, and then the start of a stretch of warehouses that bordered the river. The city was unusually quiet. No cars, no pedestrians. I was enjoying the stillness as I made my way toward the pedestrian bridge that crossed over to the other side of town. As I reached the bridge, I noticed someone standing near the far end, partially illuminated by the streetlight. She was the first person I'd seen out that night, and I assumed she was waiting for a ride, maybe an Uber.
Walking in the winter is something I would not recommend doing because you might end up getting either pneumonia or just a cold if you're not covered in warm layers, that is. Let's see what happens about this girl he's talking about seeing while walking.
She wasn't moving much, just shifting her weight from foot to foot and glancing around nervously. As I got closer, she cast a few fleeting glances in my direction, but quickly looked away each time. I thought she might be uneasy seeing someone walking toward her alone at night. I tried to make myself seem less intimidating. Headphones visible, pace steady, hands in my jacket pockets. When I passed her, I noticed her outfit. A thin jacket that looked too light for the season, ripped jeans, and a bright yellow backpack that looked like it belonged to a kid. She seemed older than I initially thought, maybe early 30s, with cropped brown hair and pale skin. Something about her didn't quite fit, but I didn't think much of it. I crossed the bridge and headed toward the park in the city's center.
She got ripped jeans and she's carrying a yellow backpack. I would be thinking that she might have been a homeless person or a drug addict. But let's just see what happens when he passes her by.
It was eerily empty, usually bustling with joggers and couples. It now felt hollow under the glow of the decorative lights strung through the trees. I took my usual loop around the park and then began heading back, passing by an old library with its towering stone columns. Turning a corner, I nearly bumped into someone. It was her, the woman from the bridge. Startled, I pulled off one side of my headphones and mumbled an apology. She stepped back but didn't say a word. She stood under the streetlight, her head slightly tilted, stealing quick glances at me like before. Her behavior set me on edge, but I nodded politely and kept walking. As I approached the next intersection, I noticed movement behind me in the reflection of a shop window. She was following me. I slowed my pace, hoping she'd pass me or veer off in another direction. Instead, she matched my speed. My pulse quickened, and I decided to test my theory. At the crosswalk, I hesitated, pretending to check my phone. She stopped too, lingering a few steps behind. I could feel her watching me. When the light changed, I walked briskly across the street, but she darted past me, her strides long and hurried. She stopped a few feet ahead and crouched down, rummaging through her backpack. Her motion struck me as odd, deliberate, yet aimless, like she wasn't really looking for anything. She kept glancing up at me, her movements jerky and erratic. The moment the light turned, I walked quickly, trying to put some distance between us. She didn't follow me immediately, but when I glanced back, she was moving again, faster this time. I reached a poorly lit section of the sidewalk near a building with mirrored windows. Glancing at the glass, I saw her reflection. She was sprinting toward me. I spun around just as she came to a sudden halt, mere feet away. Her eyes were wide, her breathing uneven. She stared at me, then down at my arms like she was sizing me up. In her hand was something small and dark, but the shadows obscured what it was. For a moment, we just stood there, locked in a tense standoff. My heart pounded, and I braced myself to defend against whatever she might do. Then, as if on cue, a car passed nearby, its headlights briefly illuminating us. The moment broke. I shouted, "What do you want?" My voice came out louder than I intended, more desperate than forceful. She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. I started backing away, one step at a time, never taking my eyes off her. She didn't move, didn't say a word. After what felt like an eternity, I turned and walked quickly toward the bridge. When I glanced back, she was still standing there, watching. Then, with an almost casual air, she turned and disappeared down a side street. I made it home without incident, constantly checking over my shoulder to make sure she wasn't behind me. My roommates urged me to call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even tell them? That some strange woman followed me? That I felt threatened but couldn't prove it? It didn't seem like enough. One of my roommates eventually called the cops for me, but by the time they patrolled the area, she was long gone. I never saw her again, but the memory of that night still lingers. The way she moved, the way she watched me. It wasn't random. I was the target of something. What she planned to do, I'll never know, but I've never walked those streets alone at night again.
That's creepy. I wouldn't blame him from looking over his shoulder because I'd be doing the same thing, make sure she didn't follow me home. I'd be agreeing with his roommate, be like, you should have called the cops. But when you're like a few distance away from her, that is. But also when he said that she darted away from him and got to a crouching position to unzip her backpack, I said, oh crap, she's pulling out a weapon of some sort. She probably had a knife and was planning on catching up to him to try to rob him or something, but I'm just glad that she didn't follow him home and he did not get seriously injured by her.
Growing up in a small town surrounded by endless woods and winding creeks, you get used to quiet winters. Snow muffles everything, and the world seems frozen in time. For me, the frozen lake just outside of town was the centerpiece of those winters. It was our makeshift skating rink, our fishing spot, our playground. But as I got older, the lake became less of a place to play and more of a place to think. It was peaceful, with only the occasional crow cawing in the distance. That peace was exactly what I needed last February. I'd been going through a rough patch. Nothing dramatic, just the usual existential dread of adulthood creeping in.
If I feel like I need to go somewhere peaceful, I'll be going to a cabin like this.
One evening, after a fresh snowstorm, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The sun was setting, and the light was that perfect winter orange that made the snow glow. I bundled up, grabbed a thermos of hot coffee, and headed out. The lake was about a 20-minute walk from my house, down a winding path lined with bare trees. By the time I got there, the sky had darkened into a deep blue, and the stars were just beginning to peek through. The lake stretched out like a mirror, perfectly still and frozen solid. Snow dusted its surface in uneven patches, and a thin mist hovered around the edges. As I walked along the shore, I noticed a figure in the distance. A man, standing in the middle of the ice. He wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, facing the far side of the lake. At first I thought he might be ice fishing, though he didn't have any gear, or maybe just enjoying the view. But something about the way he stood, motionless, gave me pause. I stopped and watched him for a moment. He was too far away for me to make out any details, just a dark silhouette against the glowing snow. I thought about calling out, but something told me not to.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Don't do it. It might be a psychopath out there. It's always strange to see other people at nighttime and you do not know what they're doing.
Maybe it was the eerie stillness of the scene, or maybe it was the way the cold seemed to press in on me all at once. I told myself he was just some guy out enjoying the solitude, like me, and kept walking. I followed the shoreline, keeping an eye on him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't move, not even a shift of weight or a turn of his head. It was like he was carved out of ice himself. A shiver ran down my spine, and not from the cold. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the crunch of snow under my boots and the thermos of coffee warming my hands. When I finally glanced back, he was gone. I stopped dead in my tracks, scanning the lake. The ice was empty. No man, no footprints, nothing.
I'll be doing the same thing too because if that guy won't even moving, and all of a sudden when you turn your back to look for him again, he's gone. Oh yeah, I don't want that guy following me back home. Oh man, that's creepy.
The air felt heavier, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the span of a minute. My breath came out in sharp puffs, hanging in the air like tiny clouds. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. There was no way he could have left the ice without me hearing. The shore was lined with thick snow, and the sound of footsteps carried far in the quiet. I told myself he'd just walked away while I wasn't looking, maybe heading to the other side of the lake. But when I stepped closer to the edge of the ice, my stomach dropped. There were no footprints leading away. The snow on the surface of the lake was undisturbed, untouched except for the tracks I'd made along the shore. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to think rationally. Maybe he'd been closer to the center of the lake than I'd thought, where the snow was thinner. Maybe he'd left through the woods on the far side. But that didn't explain why there were no tracks leading to where he'd been standing in the first place. It was like he'd just appeared there, and then vanished. I backed away from the lake, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was. The quiet that I'd found so comforting earlier now felt oppressive, almost suffocating. I hurried back the way I'd come, my boots crunching loudly in the snow. Every so often I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there again, watching me. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. I locked the door behind me and stood there for a moment, catching my breath. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was probably just some random guy I hadn't noticed leaving. But deep down, I didn't believe that. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window made me jump. Around midnight, I finally got up and peeked out the window, looking toward the direction of the lake. The snow-covered trees stood silent and dark, and the path was empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there, watching. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I bundled up and headed back to the lake, determined to find some explanation. When I got there, the surface of the ice was completely smooth. No footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there, not even mine from the night before. It was like the lake had wiped itself clean. I haven't been back to the lake since. Whatever I saw, or didn't see, still haunts me. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my imagination. But I know what I saw. There was a man on the ice, and then there wasn't. And some part of me knows he wasn't just a man.
Then what was he? A very mysterious man, that is. He probably knows that lay of the land and knows which way to go, and he stumbled upon your cabin that you were staying in. I'm just glad that he won't in no real danger.
Last December, I made the classic mistake of trusting GPS over common sense. I was driving back from a holiday party at a coworker's house, and instead of sticking to the main highway like a normal person, I let my GPS convince me that a shortcut through the back roads was a good idea. It had snowed earlier that day, leaving the roads covered in a thin, icy layer that no amount of salt seemed to touch. By the time I hit the outskirts of town, the storm had started up again, heavy flakes tumbling down like the sky was trying to erase everything. Visibility was awful, but my car, a trusty sedan, was handling it well enough. The shortcut turned out to be a single-lane road, flanked by thick, dark woods. The kind of road where you half expect to see a last gas for 50 miles sign. I told myself it was fine, that this would shave off 20 minutes. But deep down, I knew I should have turned back the moment the pavement gave way to gravel. About 10 minutes in, the car hit a patch of ice. I felt the tires skid, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought I was going to spin out. But then they caught traction again, and I let out a shaky laugh. See, I muttered to myself, totally fine.
I wouldn't be laughing at the situation because if you're on a road and you just hit a patch of ice and it starts to slide around the road, or your car starts to slide around on the road, no, I wouldn't be laughing, but I'll be trying to hit the brakes and just coast it through. And then when you get on the part of the road that ain't icy, just continue on traveling.
The road curved sharply ahead, and as I rounded the bend, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car sliding to a stop a few feet away. The figure didn't move. They were just standing there, wrapped in a coat that looked 2 sizes too big, their head bowed against the falling snow. I rolled down my window an inch, the cold air biting at my face. "Hey, are you okay?" No response. I debated honking, but something about the stillness of the figure stopped me. They weren't looking at me, weren't even acknowledging the car. It was like they were frozen, not just physically, but mentally too. After a few tense seconds, they turned and started walking toward the tree line. "Okay, that's not creepy at all," I muttered, rolling up the window. I waited until they disappeared into the woods before easing the car forward again. My heart was still racing, but I told myself it was just some weirdo.
Yeah, a weirdo that is not in any trouble, but he's probably planning on doing something. So that guy needs to go ahead and hit the pedal to the metal carefully and get out of that area.
Maybe a hunter or someone from one of the nearby farms. Then I saw the footprints. They were fresh, leading from the woods to the middle of the road where the figure had been standing. But there were no tracks leading back. None. Just a single line of prints, as if they'd appeared out of nowhere. I stared at them for a moment, the snowflakes already starting to fill them in, and then I did what any rational person would do. I got the hell out of there. The road seemed to stretch forever after that. The storm had picked up, and the snow was so heavy now that I could barely see past the hood of my car. Every tree looked like a silhouette of something waiting to jump out at me. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles ached. That's when I saw them again. The same figure, standing at the side of the road this time. Their back was to me, but I recognized the coat, the hunched posture. My breath caught, and I slowed down, not entirely by choice. My brain felt like it was stalling along with the car. As I got closer, they stepped into the road. "Are you kidding me?" I hissed, slamming on the brakes again. The car fishtailed, but came to a stop just a few feet away. This time, they didn't wait. They started walking, no, staggering, toward the car, their movements jerky and uneven, like a puppet being dragged by invisible strings. I panicked. My foot slammed down on the gas, and the car lurched forward, swerving around them. In the rearview mirror, I saw them stop and turn, their face finally visible in the dim glow of my taillights. It wasn't right. Their features were pale, almost waxy, and their eyes, if you could call them that, were empty, black hollows that seemed to swallow the light. They didn't look angry or scared. They looked wrong, like something that had been made to look human but didn't quite get it. I didn't stop again. The road eventually dumped me back onto the highway, and I didn't let myself breathe until I saw the familiar lights of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, parked under the brightest fluorescent bulb I could find, and sat there for a long time, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I finally got out to stretch my legs, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Fresh ones, circling the car in a tight, deliberate loop. There was no one else in the parking lot. The snow around me was undisturbed except for those prints. I didn't stay long after that. I made it home in record time, parked my car in the driveway, and didn't leave the house for days. I never told anyone about what happened, partly because it sounds insane, and partly because I'm not sure I want to relive it.
So it makes you wonder, are they even real people at all? Like, they might have been ghosts. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it, because he said the features on their faces were pale with almost gaunt black eyes. That would be a disturbing thing to see by itself, but it is strange that when you saw the prints the first time in the woods, that they were just coming out of the woods and nothing was going back in. I mean, I don't think it would be drug addicts, because I don't think druggies would be turning pale and have black eyes. I said, that's something wrong right there. And the fact they said when they get to the gas station that there was footprints circling the car and nobody else was there, I'm just chalking it up to ghosts in the story.
A couple of years ago, I was burned out from city life and desperate for an escape. Work had been relentless, and the constant hum of urban noise was suffocating. I needed quiet, and I needed it badly. So I did what some people might call reckless. I planned a solo winter camping trip deep in the woods. Just me, nature, and a weekend of silence. I had grown up camping with my dad and knew my way around the outdoors. To me, this wasn't risky. It was freedom. Out there, I didn't have to glance over my shoulder or walk with my keys between my fingers like I did in the city.
Sounds like a good idea of a getaway trip. But I would still be on guard, because you never know, someone or something would be out in them woods.
The woods felt like the safest place in the world. I drove for hours, the surroundings growing wilder with each mile. By the time I parked my car in a secluded lot near a national forest, the sun was already dipping low. With my gear on my back and a map in hand, I hiked deep into the woods, far from any marked trails. I found a small clearing about 4 miles in, nestled between tall pines, and set up camp. It was perfect, hidden, quiet, and undisturbed. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. I spent my time hiking, watching birds flit between trees, and just soaking in the stillness. On the 3rd day, I decided to trek a mile to a frozen creek I'd spotted on the map to try my hand at fishing. The air was so crisp, it felt sharp in my lungs, and the only sounds were the crunch of my boots in the snow and the occasional chirp of a bird. When I reached the creek, I celebrated my navigation skills and punched a hole through the ice. The fish were biting quickly, and I was thrilled to have caught something to cook back at camp. But as I crouched by the creek to clean my catch, I felt a strange unease. Something was off. At first, I thought it was the cold getting to me, or maybe the eerie quiet. Then I realized what was bothering me. There was a faint whistling sound coming from somewhere behind me. It wasn't birdsong or the wind. It was a human whistle. I froze, my knife still in hand. The whistle didn't stop. It was a slow, deliberate tune. "Hello," I called out, but the whistling continued. My stomach turned. There was no reason for anyone to be out here, not this far from the road. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted, louder this time. Nothing, just the whistling, growing fainter, until it stopped entirely.
Oh, I wouldn't even try to start a conversation with whoever's trying to make that whistle, because you never know. It's probably like a crazy person out there in the woods making a whistle, and it's just to scare somebody. Or it might be Bigfoot, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to jump into no conclusions just yet, so let's continue.
I gathered my gear and bolted back toward camp, leaving the fish behind. My heart raced as I trudged through the snow, constantly glancing over my shoulder. When I reached camp, I didn't waste time lighting a fire. Instead, I grabbed my things and prepared to pack up. But before I could take down the tent, I noticed something in the snow about 50 yards away. It was large, dark, and half buried in the white powder. I cautiously approached, my breath visible in the freezing air. As I got closer, I realized it was the carcass of a moose. Its body was stiff and frozen, a clean bullet wound through one glassy, staring eye. The kill was recent, too recent. The dread I'd felt earlier returned tenfold. A hunter wouldn't have left the kill here, not without dressing it or marking it somehow. Dragging an animal that size out of the woods would have been nearly impossible without equipment. And the gunshot. I hadn't heard a single one all day. The forest seemed darker, the silence heavier. I didn't think. I ran. I didn't care which direction, just away. By the time I saw the road through the trees, I was out of breath and soaked with sweat despite the freezing air. I found my car, jumped inside, and sped to the nearest motel without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the whistling and the moose. None of it made sense. The next morning, I called the park ranger's office and told them what I'd seen. The ranger on the other end sounded more annoyed than concerned, but he agreed to meet me and check it out. We rode into the woods on an ATV, the ranger grumbling about illegal hunters the whole way. When we reached the spot where I'd seen the moose, the carcass was gone. In its place was a trail of blood and drag marks leading into the trees. The ranger's demeanor shifted. He became quiet, his eyes scanning the woods like he was expecting something or someone to appear. He insisted on taking me back to my car immediately. As we drove, I mentioned my camp. He hesitated, then asked me to point him toward it. Reluctantly, I did. The unease on his face deepened as we approached. My tent had been slashed open. The rest of my belongings were scattered, covered in blood and what the ranger grimly referred to as moose remains. Someone, or something, had dragged the carcass to my camp. The ranger dropped me off at my car and said he'd report the incident, but I never heard back from him. I drove home that day, leaving everything behind. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there with me. What I do know is that I'll never camp alone in the woods again.
Well, I don't know what to tell you guys. I mean, a moose just laying there with a bullet in his eye, that would tell you that there was poachers out there. I don't know if they were trying to lure that guy out of there, or it might have been something like a Bigfoot out there that found the moose carcass and started eating on it and moved it. Or put some of the remains near his camp, but I don't know. There's a lot of red flags in that story. That's kind of strange. I'm just glad he did the right thing and just getting out of there before he found out who or what was in the woods with him. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more Midnight Terrors content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man Score channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. That's a wrap, and have a nice day, y'all.